Welcome to this presentation for the Mission SoMa Transit Improvements Project. This is an SFMTA Transit Priority Street Project, part of the Muni Forward program. In today's presentation, we'll be covering project background, temporary emergency transit lanes, project goals and potential benefits, the previous street design and the design with temporary emergency transit lane project, temporary emergency transit lane evaluation, proposed modifications, and next steps and timeline. Mission is a major transit corridor. The 14 and 14R are among the busiest Muni routes, along with the 38 and 38R on Geary. For this reason, a transit priority project was recommended for this segment of Mission a decade ago as part of the SFMTA's Transit Effectiveness Project, or TEP. Transit priority improvements were made in other parts of the corridor in the Mission several years ago. And temporary improvements were made south of Market last fall as part of the Temporary Emergency Transit Lanes, our TETL program, part of the agency's response to the COVID pandemic. Finally, construction of the Better Market Street project will require temporary relocation of some Muni routes from Market to Mission starting as soon as this fall, and some of those could be made permanent, requiring even more capacity for transit on Mission. Here is a map of the project area. It is mostly from 11th Street in the west, east to 1st Street, a distance of about 1.5 miles, with a few elements extending west to South Van Ness and east to Beale. This segment of Mission is used not only by the Muni 14 and 14R, but by Golden Gate Transit and Samtrans buses. And as I noted, it will soon be used by other routes, including the 9 and 9R. It also connects to other important transit corridors and hubs, including the 8, 30, and 45 on 3rd and 4th Streets, and the Salesforce Transit Center at 1st Street. Here are some quick facts about Muni service on Mission south of Market. While our service levels have been changing with the COVID pandemic, if we return to pre-COVID levels, the 14, 14R, and 14X, plus the 9 and 9R, would add up to more than one bus every 2 minutes each way during rush hours. And while no one knows how much traffic there will be downtown in the near future, on Mission, traffic is already approaching pre-COVID levels. And prior to COVID, Mission buses were often slow and unreliable, as you can see on screen. About the Temporary Emergency Transit Lanes program. This project was already being actively planned when the COVID pandemic began. So some improvements were temporarily implemented as part of the TETL program last fall. Under the program, changes have to be reversed within 120 days of the city's emergency order being lifted, unless they are approved separately by the MTA Board of Directors. So we are now moving forward with separate approval of those changes, along with some additional elements and refinements based on evaluation of the temporary project, all of which I will describe momentarily. Here are our project goals. Reduce delay to both reduce travel times and improve reliability, increase capacity for transit on Mission, provide more space at busy bus stops, make operations safer and more efficient, and advance equity for Muni riders of color. The previous design for the segment of Mission was made up of 2 lanes of traffic each way, plus curbside parking and loading on both sides of the street. Because the roadway is not quite wide enough for that, the traffic lanes were very narrow, about 9 feet. Including rear-view mirrors on both sides, buses are wider than that. So during certain hours, and this varied by block, the curbside parking and loading would be tow-away restricted so that the outer lanes could be made wider and designated transit only. This was during rush hours when there were more buses, and this meant that A, transit lanes were only part-time, and B, most of the time they were in effect, parking and loading was prohibited on that side of the street. Here you can see what bus drivers typically did outside of rush hours before the TETL project. They would straddle the lanes to avoid making contact with parked cars or trucks, or vehicles that might try to squeeze past them. and this would reduce the effective traffic capacity of the street by half. Here's the design we implemented last fall on a temporary basis that we are now seeking to put in place longer term. It removed parking and loading on one side of the street. This allowed us to make the travel lanes standard width. And this, in turn, allowed us to make the transit lanes full-time rather than part-time, with a reduced risk of collisions at all times. This also allowed us to lift the tollway restrictions on the remaining parking and loading. As part of our redesign, we went through block to block and based our design on where removing parking and loading would have the least impact. We shifted the design from one block to the next on that basis, and in some cases from one end of the block to the other. We also converted some remaining parking spaces to commercial and passenger loading. We are now refining our design based on evaluation, as well as feedback we've received from property and business owners. Here you can see how much more room buses have to stay in their lanes since the temporary changes. Here are the three main ways we evaluated the temporary project and where we needed to make changes. 1, a technical evaluation. 2, a community survey. And 3, a merchant and loading zone survey. The community and merchant loading zone surveys were translated into Spanish, Chinese, and Tagalog. We are also doing direct outreach to social service providers and community-based organizations. Here are preliminary findings from our evaluations so far. 1, transit travel times have remained relatively steady since last summer, even as traffic has increased. In January through March, traffic volumes on this segment of Mission were about 20% higher than last summer. By comparison, transit travel times in the midday, when we added transit lanes, increased by around 1 to 3%. This shows that the transit lanes were successful at protecting transit from traffic delays. 2, even though we had to remove parking and loading spaces to widen lanes, by lifting tollway restrictions, we were able to increase the total hours of availability of commercial loading zones by nearly 40%. And 3, we found that 65% of survey respondents supported making the changes permanent, compared to just 24% who were opposed. To see the full evaluation report, please visit the project webpage at sfmta.com/templanes14. Here is a summary of what we are now proposing. In addition to the changes to parking and loading based on evaluation that I mentioned, we would like to convert the transit lanes to red carpets, and we will be moving the eastbound transit lane from the outer to the inner lane between 2nd Street and Bill. We will also be lifting tollway restrictions as far east as Bill. We are proposing to lengthen bus stops to make sure we have enough room for all of the buses that may be on mission. We are proposing a bulb stop, or wider sidewalk, at 4th, where transfers can be made to Chinatown buses and the future Central Subway. We are moving one stop across an intersection at 11th, but are not moving any other stops. For safety reasons, we are proposing to restrict left turns across the transit lane westbound at Washburn, west of 9th, where there is no traffic signal, and eastbound at 11th, drivers in the right lane will be required to turn right. Note that rapid buses might also make fewer stops, although local buses would continue to serve every stop. Again, you can see the before and after street design proposal on our project webpage at sfmta.com/templanes14, including specific changes proposed to parking and loading. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and you are invited to our 2-week online open house April 19th through May 3rd. Alternately, feedback can be submitted via email at tellmuni@sfmta.com or by calling 415-646-2350. Again, thank you.